Okay, number one for us tonight, and we're very excited to have probably our biggest guest that we've had, Jono Pech, who is a writer and a podcaster, and he wrote the narrative for the game that we just reviewed a couple weeks ago, Trigger Witch. First of all, congratulations. The game seems to be getting, pretty good reception. And I think a lot of it has to do with the story, which we'll get into the nuts and bolts of that in a little bit here. But how are you doing today for you, tonight for us?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. It's this is kind of like as far as I've got scheduled, this is the end of my podcast world tour talking about about Trigger Witch, because I've probably done 6 or 7 of these, and it's all been building up to this one. So
right, best for last.
Yeah.
So like I said, we did a video review with our friend Ty here a couple weeks ago. We talked very glowingly about the story, but also the gameplay in general, and how I feel like it's kind of like a love letter to sort of, I know a lot of people have said Link to the Past. It feels more Secret of Mana to me, but maybe that's just because I've played that fairly recently. But the story itself, I mean, it's super unique. Where did the idea for, witches toting these heavy duty firearms kind of come from?
Yeah. So the Rainbite team that's been together for 4 or 5 years at this point, put out their first game, Reverie, and then I guess they wanted to amp things up from then, because that was more of a Zelda-like, almost like shot for shot, in the terms of, instead of the sword, they had like a cricket bat, and it was hand-to-hand combat at close range. And I think there wasn't a whole lot of complexity to the combat. So from what I understand, being an outsider, just a contractor that's worked on the game, Dan, who's the director at Rainbite and the lead artist, had the idea to do a similar style of game in terms of the simple kind of 16-bit Zelda kind of style graphics and everything, but adding some shooting. And I think just the concept of a fantasy setting with guns in it was something new that he didn't recall seeing before. So that was really the impetus for the vibe and the style of the game, and going for that contrast between cute, colorful pixel art and then gory blood and bloodshed. Yeah.
It's so comically over the top. It's we just watched Suicide Squad, and that's kind of just the heavy duty, the blood and the gore, is it kind of fit in with that theme. So it was originally, I'm gathering, their idea, and then you kind of sort of massaged it out.
Yeah, exactly. It was more or less like the world was created, and the basic outline of the plot was there, in terms of, you've got this portal, shoots out guns, you've got these witches that have turned them into a religion, and then there's an enemy that comes along that has to be chased down and overcome. So that was the story when I got there. So for me, it was a matter of fleshing it out and turning it into a world that makes sense and is connected, and the gameplay all kind of feeds into the narrative as well, and vice versa.
How long was that process? I mean, that's something I always find is, with writing anything, whether it's a video game or books or anything like that, what's the timeline for something like that?
Yeah, so for me, I probably, like, the bulk of my work was done over probably 4 or 5 months. And then from there, it was about just like coming back to it and adjusting things. Because I got like ahead of the development of the game, basically, because writing's a lot easier to do in a short amount of time than building an actual game. So I would write like one of the dungeons, as far as like the story of that dungeon, and then they'd come back and be like, oh, we decided to change the boss from this to this. So I was like, okay, how does that conflict with what I've already done? I have to go back and fix it. Or they add a mechanic, or they add like a broom section, one of the shmup flying broom sections. So I have to like think about like, okay, how do we work narrative into this so that it's not just dropped on the player out of nowhere? So there was a bunch of those things that would happen throughout development, which was a fun challenge as a writer to kind of address those and try and feed them into the world. And pretty much right up until, release, I was making tweaks and corrections and fixes, even if it was just something that I'd go back and see, and I didn't like exactly how something was phrased, or I missed a punctuation mark here and there. That it's always different when you sit down and play the game versus reading through like a text document to see how things feel on the screen and in the context. I might write something and then the setting that it ends up being drawn in is completely at odds with what I pictured when I was writing it. So that's another example of where, I had to go back and say, it doesn't feel right based on the art. So I'm going to make a last minute tweak.
So just one of those things, and you kind of mentioned it as far as like tweaking things and such, was there was a lot of homages to different things. I think there was like the Sacred Symbols trophy, for example. Confirm or deny in the one Goblin tent, was it a Princess Bride reference?
It was. I threw like tons and
nice
tons of references into this game of different things that are meaningful to me. That one in particular was actually a request from one of the other guys in Rainbite. Nice. That was like, we've made this room with these two goblets. Can you add something in here that ends with inconceivable? And
that's
I was
awesome.
Like, sure, why not?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one of my all-time favorites.
And I guess you talk about you writing it in your own process. How much input do you have on making the mechanics or any of the specifics of the gameplay work within the nature of the story? Are you able, after writing, are you able to do anything, when the actual like game itself is being built?
Sorry, can you rephrase that? I'm a bit confused.
Oh, sure. Like, how much input did you have on making the mechanics of the game? Yeah. Beyond, once you kind of have your script together, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, probably a very, very small amount, because the guys, like the Rainbite guys, are the experts. Like they've studied this, they've made games before. So if anything, it was more like just me suggesting things as a player. Like if I got to play like an earlier build, they'd ask, what do you think of the reload system? Or, and like, what do you think of, the checkpoints or the fast travel? So I'd give my feedback, and as much as any tester, when it's early in the game, you've got a bit of ability to maybe shape the way that it goes. But then there's things that I would suggest that end up being in the game as far as environmentally. So for example,
okay, cool.
You get to the beach and there's these miners' boats along the beach, and that's a response to the lore that I created, where these miners had come from a different island to mine gems in this Evertonia land. So that was a direct result of giving that bit of backstory. And then there's a whole sequence that wouldn't have been in the game without the idea I had for the story, which is when you get to the top of one of the dungeons, which is a ice prison, and there's basically an outcast from the village who's set up as a hermit, and they're like a prophet of the old ways of magic, and they don't believe in guns and everything. So that was an idea that I had, and it culminated in this moment where they take you out to look across the whole game world with this amazing view of the land. And you get, for the first time, you see the area to the north that you haven't explored yet. You can see there's like this magic wall that separates the two, and people may have finished the game or seen screenshots, but that's where the game ends as well, and the credits roll, because it's such a beautiful kind of closing shot. And that was something that, as a writer and thinking about like the pacing of the game, I thought it was really important to stop after completing like 3 or 4 dungeons to have this moment of reflection in the story, and have this new perspective offered by that character that you meet there, that maybe the way that your culture's living isn't exactly what it's cracked up to be. And that introduces, I think, something that will be a theme for the rest of the game. And it also gives the player a moment to relax from, all the combat, and take in a bit of reflection and just, like the serenity of being up there and enjoying a really beautiful pixel art horizon, so to speak.
Yeah. So we're going to spoil something. So if you haven't played it, you haven't seen the end. So the end, Where did the idea come from to have the primary villain be, as I stated in our review, like literal actual Joseph Stalin?
That was, again, the guy that came up with the concept for the game, Dan. Okay. I guess he was thinking, like, who could we make this villain? And Hitler's been done to death. Sure. So why not Joseph Stalin? It's a fun thing to do, as far as like the whole Russia thing is a concept that is fun to explore in games. I can't really think of a game that has, you're taking on Stalin and his comrades, in terms of, like, we've seen Wolfenstein and we've seen all these other games that do it with the Nazis.
Sure.
And I think, like, some people look at it as like a really out of left field thing, and like, why did you bring this real world element into a fantasy story? But I really love the way that makes the guns and the portal make sense. Like, it actually has a meaning beyond, like, the shock value or the meme value of, like, oh, it's Joseph Stalin. Like, it actually, if you actually pay attention to the story and read, like, the notes that you pick up in the Russian dungeon, and you take in, like, what Stalin's saying, it's like, okay, so the Russians set this whole thing up to explore an alternate dimension and discover the power of magic so that they could further Stalin's takeover of the world. Sure. Quest for domination.
I kind of got when you make it to the last dungeon there and you hop out, I was like, is that the hammer and sickle? And I kind of like started to piece it together a little bit. Yeah. And then you get Tesla's gun. Ty, who reviewed it with us for the video, had said that leading up to it, the first few times you see the Man in Black, you see he's got like a mustache. His theory that it was, and I don't know if this is a compliment or an insult, but his theory was that it was Jack Black from Nacho Libre. So I'm not, like I said, not sure if that's a compliment or an insult, but either way, I really thought that, like you said, the shock value, but also you tied it in a way that kind of made it make sense past that, but it was very funny. And that was one of the things that we had both said, is you have to play this game. It's not terribly long. I mean, it took me about 9.5 hours to get the platinum trophy. So just playing it for that, the narrative and the ending and how it just kind of totally comes out of left field is well worth playing the game. But it's also, it's very fun. It plays well. It plays very smoothly. So yeah, kudos just on all of those topics, though, just about the game.
It's funny, like, sorry to interrupt, but
go ahead.
It's funny because, like, we knew it would be, like, not controversial, but I guess divisive and polarizing. But sure. Ultimately, like some people said, like, oh, it would have been better to have just some generic fantasy villain, but, like, really, that's pretty boring. Like,
I don't know that it would have.
And that would not be memorable. Like, a lot of people have said in their reviews, like, maybe this game doesn't stand out for everything else. Maybe, like, to some people it does, but to some people it doesn't. But they're not gonna forget the ending. Like, if they got that far,
right?
And every review has either you can tell when some people haven't played the whole game, but the people that have finished the game, it's really clear. Like, some people either love it and they say, like, you got to play it just to see what happens at the end, and some people hate it, but I think the majority of people have been positive. So I'd like to meet cool to see that. Yeah.
I'd like to meet one of the people who doesn't like that and just try to find out what they think is funny.
That was gonna be my question. Yeah, that was gonna be my question. Is like, what was the response to having an ending like that? Because I mean, that just is hilarious to me. Like, I just think that's so great. That's right in my humor. It's like, here's an actual real life villain at the end, and but not someone that. It's one of those funny things. It's like, Stalin is, one of the most, like, evil, leaders of all time, but he kind of gets forgotten. And so, like, the fact that you put him in here, because it's always a Hitler thing at the end of things, and to have Stalin in there, I thought was like a really clever move. So that's just very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun to kind of research him and look at some of the stuff they were doing back then, because a lot of what's in the game is actually, like, real. Like, they did have this investigative, like, research bureau where they were looking into crazy technology, and they did kidnap this scientist from Germany called Max Steenbeck, who was researching, like, particle acceleration. So, I doubt they got as far as a portal to another realm, but they were probably trying. And, like the timeline doesn't exactly match up for rocket ships and Stalin, but we know the Russians were deep into the space race. And I came up with that theory, like the goblins, we had the goblins having this magic ability that wasn't violent. It was more like levitation and talking to animals and stuff like that. So for that, I was like, okay, Stalin's gone there. He's learnt the levitation magic and he's applied that to his rocket ship. So he's going to be the first to go into space, before Sputnik and before the Americans. So it's an alternate timeline. We went Quentin Tarantino on their ass.
Yes. Well, I mean, just from that, obviously you're like very creative guy. You've written 2 novels, The Spy and the Maven and The Maven Effect, both available on Amazon. How different is writing the narrative for a game and the narrative for writing a novel?
It's so different because when you're writing a novel, you have a blank slate and there's not really any limits, but there are a lot of limits and constraints in a video game, especially when it's majority of what you're writing is just dialogue. Like you can't, like it's not a visual novel. It's not, it's not voice acted and it's not cutscenes like The Last of Us or anything. So you can't put in there like all these nuances, like the way that they look at each other or, the expressions that they make. Like there's a little bit of room for that with some animations where like Colette gets frustrated or angry or laughs or something, but it's very limited. So you have to be dumbing it down to an extent and presenting it, because it's also pixel art and this fun kind of cute vibe. It's also a bit more simplified because of that to match that. But at the same time, you've got the constraints of not wanting the player to get bored and skip through text. So that's a constant thing of like, okay, are we doing the story justice whilst not overstaying our welcome? And for some players, regardless, it's going to be too much dialogue. And I've seen a lot of videos where people skip through it, and that's fine because that's just the way some people play games. But for the people that enjoy having their worlds a bit more fleshed out in the way that I do when I play games, I found that interesting as a challenge to kind of try and do that. And also writing a book, like my opinion was the opinion that mattered the most. But for this game, being that I'm working for a studio, the 3 guys that run that studio, their opinion is basically more important than mine. So as much as I'm writing it and they trust me to write it, like I had to take into account their perspective and what their vision for the game and for who the certain characters were and how they were represented. So it was a good challenge to kind of have a client, I guess, so to speak, and to be keeping them happy. Not that they were controlling or anything like that. It was more just, I guess, the process of collaboration as a developer. And that's the same, I think, whether you're an artist or a composer or anything. When you're working in a team, not just a solo, independent, creative, then you do have to think about the way that other people are going to interpret something, which is good. It's also good in some ways, because if I'm happy with it and 3 other people are happy with it, that's like some good kind of affirmation and box checks that if the 4 of us are happy, then the chances are other people hopefully will like it too.
Sure. Yeah. Just one kind of last question here to wrap up. And like I said, we appreciate your time. If you had any advice for people trying to get into, because you're involved in a lot of stuff, games. I know you did the sound, some of the sound stuff with this as well. But if you had any advice to anybody who wanted to get into games, writing, podcasting, any of the stuff that you've kind of delved in, because you have a day job too, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, I mean, what advice would you give to folks trying to, crack this egg, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, podcasting is a separate thing kind of, because anyone can do it. Like the fact that you guys are doing it, the fact that I did it, like out of like without, you don't like need to have like a university degree, or you don't need to know anyone. You can just do it. And that's the great thing about podcasting. So if that's what you want to do, just do it. follow the advice of people that you can find and who've done it before. Reach out to someone that's got more experience than you. As far as like getting into game development, I haven't got, like, prior to this game, my game dev experience is zero. And
Right.
the way that I got into it is simply that I had the skills in terms of, I'd written these 2 books. I've been a journalist for my whole professional career. And I that means that I can edit, I can, write professionally. So if you've got a skill in something, whether or not you've got game dev experience, there should be a way that you can apply it to games. It's just a matter of finding what that is, whether it's marketing, social media, maybe you're an accountant, maybe you're a lawyer. Game companies need all these things too. But especially on the indie scene, you might have a skill that people who study programming don't have. And that's what I did. So from there, it's like applying that skill to the area that you're interested in, but you have to know people that are looking for that as well.
Sure.
I don't think there'd be many indies. I mean, I'm about to find this out myself as I search for my next gig, but there aren't exactly a whole lot of small indie studios with money to just be splashing around to writers and to people that have these skills that aren't entirely essential to getting a game out. So you just really have to network and know people and try to go to the conventions, meet the indie developers that are working on these things, be part of their community, get in their Discords, get in their Twitter feeds and whatever it is, to try and build relationships. And from there, like, that's how I got into this game, is that I had a friendship with the people that made it through interviewing them on my podcast, putting in work years ago. And from there, they knew that they could trust me as a worker, and they knew that I had the ability because I'd published my books. So I guess, to sum it up in a succinct way, it's like, know what your skill is and have a skill, and then know how you can apply it to game dev, and then find people that might be the right fit for you and make yourself available to them.
Greg, any follow-up?
Do you have anything on the forefront that people need to be aware about, or going forward for you?
Promote yourself.
Yeah, promote yourself is what I'm asking, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got this far without playing Trigger Witch, it's been spoiled for you by now, but go and play it anyway, because it's really fun. And
Yes,
like, even if you know the twist, the second time you play through, you'll see all these little hints towards the world that is revealed towards the end. Otherwise, there's physical editions if you are a really big fan of the game, so you can still pick up a Switch or a PS5 collector's edition, or just a regular physical edition through Play Asia. I don't have any games coming out after this because I just finished it, but if you're an indie dev listening for some reason, let me know if you need some help, because I'm looking for that. I've got a couple of podcasts, Puttin in Work, which is my interview show, and then Comedy Rewind, which is my comedy rewatch podcast looking at 90s and 2000s movies. So that's always good fun, part of the 8-bit community. And that's it. Thanks for having me on the show. It's always fun talking about something that I've put as much thought and effort into as Trigger Witch. And thanks for the review and for the coverage and the opportunity as well, guys.
Definitely.
Appreciate
It was a
Yeah.
pleasure. Like I said, we really appreciate your time. And good luck with everything in the future, man. I hope
Thanks.
that we're able to have you back for whatever the next game is.
I'd love to. That'd be awesome.
All righty.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thanks.